Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to our latest program on the issue of Let's Talk About Palestine. We have two very interesting and important guests with us, and they have their own experiences in terms of being in Palestine and and having conversations here in the United States on these issues. The first is Imam Rashad Abdul-Rahmaan from the Atlanta Masjid of Al-Islam. And Imam Abdul-Rahmaan is also responsible for teaching and implementation of Masjid and community programs. Welcome, Imam Abdul-Rahmaan.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Is it Rahman or Rahma?
Rahman.
Rahman. Okay, I think
Yes.
there's a typo.
Yeah.
Use us on that. We'll get that.
No problem.
We'll get that created. How are you doing today?
Alhamdulillah. Good. How about you?
Good, alhamdulillah. Well, welcome. I just wanted you to tell our audience, what you've been working on in terms of Masjid al-Islam in Atlanta. I know it's one of the more prominent mosques in the United States. Every time I talk to somebody, Rami Nashashibi from Chicago, or somebody here named Muhammad Malas from Orange County, they're telling me they're going to Masjid al-Islam in Atlanta. So tell us about the programs there and the community programs that you have.
Well, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, with God's name, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer. Again, thank you for having me. Yes, I serve currently as the assistant imam or associate imam of Atlanta Masjid of Al-Islam, and they have us really, according to the numbers, we're really considered the largest African American Muslim masjid. And we do a lot. We do a little bit of everything from convert care to we have a full-time school that goes from kindergarten through 12th grade. We do just a range of courses on Sirah, advanced, introductory, Arabic, Quranic Arabic, Tajweed. We run a HIF program. So we have a lot of things, I think, that are pretty much, I would say, standard masjid programming to service the community. We do food pantry work, things of that nature. And then as well, we have youth organizations, we have health and wellness organizations, just a range of things to serve the community needs for the population here in Atlanta.
And, when it comes to the issue of Palestine and Atlanta, it's something very interesting that I hear and try to deconstruct it for us. What I hear, especially from African-American pastors, Christian leaders, is that because the Jewish community supported Martin Luther King, and that they were supporting the civil rights movement, they are more not beholden, but they're more have more affinity to the pro-Israel community. John Lewis, for example, a congressman there, was one of the strongest supporters of Israel. And I always wondered how that reconciled in terms of civil rights work here, and where we see obvious human and civil rights violations done against the Palestinians over there. How do you navigate that with African-American Christian leaders?
Well, I'm going to be, I haven't been on this show before, so I'm going to be just myself.
That's what we want. Very, very straightforward conversation.
Yeah, I think that that type of response from African American leadership, from the church, and in government is more politically motivated than it is motivated by the urge to be truthful. There are always trade-offs. There are always things to consider when speaking in the public. And I think that a lot of our leaders, frankly, are not free to think or speak. In other words, they operate and they speak in a manner that is appropriate for their particular office that they hold or the spot that they have in society. So they're not allowed to really speak from their genuine human selves. I don't think that it's a complicated matter as it pertains to the Palestinian issue. And we, from the history of African Americans, we believe that we have, this is sort of a ubiquitous feeling that all of us share, be you Black, African American, Muslim, Christian, or any other thing. We sort of identify with the plight of oppressed peoples. So we talk about this around our dinner tables with our non-Muslim family members. It's just something that's known in the air of Black life. So that type of language and that orientation, I just don't think it's all the way genuine. And there's another thing too that I'll just add. It's nuanced. The Jewish community is not homogenous. I mean, they're people, and you have different types of Jews. And I think oftentimes when discussion is had about the relationship between the Black community and the Jewish community, as an example, we're speaking about a particular type, a particular group among the broader Jewish community. I don't, and the merit and the credit that those ones that helped us in our work, such as civil rights, that doesn't cancel out, or that really doesn't have to, that doesn't play a major part in how we view, for example, Zionism. Many Black leaders, even during that time, were against the Zionist movement because they saw it as an extension of the colonialist, and from our perspective, the Jim Crow ethos of Western society.
That's an important distinction to make. And unfortunately, in our society today, there's a conflation of Zionism and Judaism, or let me put it more accurately, that anti-Zionism now is equated with anti-Semitism.
Right.
And it's creating tension, obviously, especially with the Muslim community. I imagine with a lot of the social justice and peace and justice community, that what we see in terms of Israel's behavior and policies towards the Palestinians needs to be criticized as Americans, as people of faith, and it needs to be changed. And if it requires pressure, then we have to apply pressure, especially since the United States is the #1 financial, military, and political sponsor, meaning political protection in international arenas to, and for the state of Israel. So how do you suggest we navigate that issue as forget about being Muslim, just being people of conscience who want to have an American or a U.S. policy that is more aligned with human rights? I think we lost your voice. Okay. Well, as we work to bring Imam Rashad back, let us bring on Sam. There you are, Sam.
Hi,
how are
Salam.
you?
I'm very well. How are you? I'm okay despite the state of the world.
Yeah. Well, Sam is an entrepreneur and humanitarian co-founder, advisor, board member of System, a global market maker and software development company that provides projects and institutions the expertise, flexibility, and transparency they need to succeed. And Sam is of Palestinian background, and he's also a member of our Hollywood bureau. So we wanted Sam to come on and have a conversation with me and Imam Rashad as soon as we can get him back. I think we're having some technical difficulties. But Sam, I don't know if you were listening to my conversation with the Imam
I was.
about these issues. How do we navigate that in your sector, in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are multiple ways to go about it. And I think the Imam actually touched upon something important that we always have to remember, and that is nuance. There are many ways to look at this, and two opposing ideas can be true at the same time. Unfortunately, we've digressed into a situation where we're shouting at each other. We're using triggering words. We're using things that shut down the conversation. Currently, I'm reading the autobiography of Martin Luther King Jr. and meeting with a number of millennials and Gen Zers who do not look at this conflict and who do not look at this current state of events as something that we have succeeded in being able to get our points across. And there are many reasons for that. However, we are in a situation now where you've spread, because of the Nakba and Naksa, you've spread the best, brightest individuals all around the world. I'm first generation, born in Chicago. I'm American, you know, culturally American. I look at the world from a worldview that is more holistic. I've traveled to over 40 countries. I've been into multiple industries, including why I came to Los Angeles in the first place, to be in the film industry, to work in film. My first business partner was Jewish. We started Olive Branch Productions to tell socially aware films. So everything that I've ever done, from wanting to go to law school, which to my father's chagrin, I went to the film industry instead, to the entrepreneurial endeavors that I've embarked upon, they all lead back to one thing, and it's how do we make the world a better place, and how do we make the world equitable? And that starts with the mutual respect that we must give to one another. Save that, all we're doing is shouting, and we are not really making progress to where we want to go and where we foresee the world to be.
And how are you dealing with that as a Palestinian in your sector?
Well, so I mean, I started in the film industry. I started writing scripts in 2005. I optioned a couple of screenplays. I came and worked for a company called Spotlight Pictures and Strategic Film Partners. Oftentimes, as you know, Hollywood is sort of, especially right now, very split. But when I first entered into the fray in 2005, 2006, you know, my name doesn't connotate an Arab name necessarily. And so, you know, a lot of people would find out that I'm Palestinian, and they would tell me, you're not what I expected. So I try to lead by example. I try to lead by the fact that I am a critical thinker. And I think that I approach that in every industry that I'm in. In the blockchain industry, where I've found success, I closed my Series A last year on a company that I co-founded, which you mentioned, System 9. Every single industry that I embark upon, I bring my identity to the forefront, in order for it to showcase that we are not a monolith. Nothing is a monolith, in fact. There is multiple ways of looking at any situation and at any people. And I always say this, on a long enough timeline, nothing exists. Not the United States of America, not Islam, not Judaism, but what does exist? Our common humanity. And our common humanity is what we need to actually start leaning into as globalization continues to occur, as the information paradigm, the internet, continues to proliferate. And we've seen now that the misinformation and disinformation of that information paradigm is creating a schism in our reality. And that's why you see the fake news. And now we have to triple check, quadruple check things, look at what is being omitted. And I challenge, you know, both sides, all sides, to look at that and to empirically look at the evidence before making judgment, and not to categorize people in a way that shuts down conversation. And I think that really is the crux of it. If you think that you are not going to be able to have to speak to the other side, well, you're sadly mistaken. And every single major conflict, from Gandhi in India, he had to deal with the British. From Nelson Mandela in South Africa, he had to deal with the Afrikaners. From Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, they had to deal with the powers that be here in the United States. So if anyone thinks that we're going to unilaterally do this or that, as we have seen throughout history for the last several decades, that does not work, and that is not the path forward. And this is why I have buried myself in the teachings of Martin Luther King, in the teachings of Nelson Mandela, in the teachings of Gandhi, because that is the way forward, and that is the way for us to have a better future.
Yeah, and especially in America, it's the only way forward. It's through these great leaders, as you mentioned, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, in America. Imam Rashad, thank you for. Please, we apologize for the technical difficulties. I know we lost you there for a few minutes, but I'm glad you're back. You know, in response to Sam's points about following the footsteps of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, what would they say today if they saw what we are seeing, and they saw our president behave the way he's behaving by declaring himself a Zionist, and they see that so many of us are being targeted and intimidated, you know, to just not not convert, but to accept that Zionism is, to put it bluntly, has become the law of the land. If the Congress
Right.
saying that we have to accept Zionism, and some of our faith leaders are pressured not to say anything about that. How do we navigate that? How do we address that from a political and a religious perspective?
Yes. Well, the short answer is I believe both Dr. King and Malcolm El-Hajj Malik Shabazz, may God forgive him his sins and grant him paradise. I do believe that both of them would be in unison in terms of being vehemently against the position of our president. What's unique about both of them, seemingly, at least on the surface, they start off sort of on opposite ends of the spectrum. But at the end of their lives as leaders, they become more and more universal in their outlook, addressing the human condition. And I think that Sam really hit it right on the mark regarding our common humanity. The world has become more humanly sensitive, whether it wants to or not. We can't help it. We can literally, I'm on the phone right now. My computer has a bug on it. I'm actually on the phone and I'm able to talk to you all from your respective locations, and there are persons watching us from their respective locations. So that augments and it makes more complex this dynamic that's occurring in this modern time of connectivity, human connectivity. Because we're in a time such as this, the only ideology, the only thought system or belief system or way of being that is really properly fit to survive and benefit us all in this time are those ideas that put emphasis on our common human value, our common human life. And I think that this may be philosophical, but I think that what we have really been experiencing in these late times are just growing pains. We're coming out of the colonial era. We're still in it to a large extent as it pertains to economic colonialism and things of that nature. So there's going to be some growing pains, but it seems as though the world in its motion where it currently is, it is forcing us to become more human. And because that is the case, justice has to really be justice. It can't be justice just from the viewpoint of America. It has to be universal justice. Mercy and compassion really has to be mercy and compassion. And I think that what the calling is for us as faith leaders, as community leaders, activists, is to be in touch with that spirit and to speak out, to interject in this environment that spirit as sort of an antidote to this poison. Because I think that in conclusion, I think that a lot of these media outlets, a lot of these pundits, they are actively working against the times. We have to be actively working towards the advance of where this time is. And we have to be consciously, again, interjecting an anecdote to poison. Racism is a poison. Colonialism, any idea that puts one group above another group, and my group is superior to yours, or I have rights that you don't have, it's a poison. It's a cancer to humanity. So we have to be modern day medicine men, I guess we could call ourselves.
Yeah.
I love that.
That is great. Thank you, Imam Rashad. Sam, how do you see your sector in terms of where the pro-Israel voices are and the social justice voices are? Because both in the faith community, the space that Imam Rashad works in, and in the Hollywood sector, in the space that you work in, what I see is that the establishment is saying one thing, and it's top down, forcing everybody to align. But from the bottom, you see a groundswell of opposition because the nature of both Hollywood and the faith community is more intrinsically aligned with social justice. That was that's what drives us, right? So
Mhm.
how do you see that dynamic playing out?
Yeah, I think that we have to be truthful with the historical narratives that we sort of are not agreeing upon, right? The Imam talked about colonialism and talked about the idea of colonialism. So let's talk about that a little bit, right? The British and French mandate systems are intrinsic to what happened in the Middle East and what is happening in the Middle East. That these decisions have long tails all across the board. Now, would you call the Jewish people fleeing from pogroms and fleeing from persecution and all that colonialists? I don't necessarily think that I would call them that. I would say that they are escaping from the worst type of atrocities worldwide. And Theodore Herzl and the First Zionist Congress, this was a matter of where do we go to be safe? Now, has Israeli government has it evolved into something that is has racist elements? Sure. Jake Tapper on CNN said so much, right? He said that Ben Gvir and Smotrich and these other guys, these elements, but these elements are also a symptom of the entirety. So what you're seeing right now, and you've been seeing it in Hollywood, you saw it with Javier Bardem and Penelope Cruz, you see it with, other Jewish, icons, there are other people such as, Seth Rogen talking about how we were fed a certain, sort of rhetoric. So I think we're sort of having this reckoning, right, where everyone is sort of surprised at this worldwide groundswell that's happening, but it's not so surprising. And every action that I see, even Israelis, hardcore, unfortunate, tragic, ways of looking at how to deal with Gaza, is stymied or mirrored in the foundation of how to deal with what they believe is, wanting to be wiped off the face of the earth. And historically, they're right. Historically, they have been persecuted in such a way. And, there's all these people who deny the Holocaust, deny all this stuff. Like, there's enough evidence across the board that there is the anti-Jewish rhetoric that occurs everywhere. And I think what is happening when you're talking about the top and the bottom right now is that we need to be able to find mutual respect of being able to discuss with one another. And I actually had a call this morning with a really amazing individual in Brooklyn. And it goes back to my point earlier, the individuals here who have now found success and who are trying to find a way forward, whether they be pro-Israeli or pro-Palestinian, are genuinely trying to bridge those gaps. I, for one, went to the Jewish temple in Venice a few weeks ago. I was the only Palestinian American in that room. Why? Because I am to build bridges. If I am eventually going to help push this into its final place of peace and tranquility and justice and dignity and safety for everyone there, then that is what we all have to do, without shouting people down, without sitting there and saying, yes, this is wrong or that is wrong. We can debate the historical narrative of the last 100 years plus all day long, but what is going on now? And where do we go from here? And I think that is where we have to start moving the conversation. The conversation has to stop with the triggering words, the dog whistling. All these other elements are just distracting. We need to eliminate them completely. And I think that's in any sector, but it's specifically Hollywood. And, Hollywood in general has sort of lost a little bit of its luster, as we all know. The pandemic sort of was an eye-opening experience for a lot of people, saying, hey, what really matters in life and what really matters to us. And I think people, as Hollywood or just the film industry has become more global, I think there's more perspectives that are happening. There's more, just look at our current, Netflix channels. I mean, there's shows out of Korea and Israel and Russia and all these different places now that we can now look at other cultures. So there it has to begin with a mutual respect and being able to speak to people in a way that says, hey, I'm not trying to trigger you. I'm not trying to create a place that makes you feel like, I'm wiping one people out or another people out, but I'm trying to find a place where we can sit down and have difficult dialogue. And whether it takes a day, a week, a month, or over a year, we don't leave that negotiation table until we resolve the issues that finally bring this to rest.
Imam Rashad, again, back to the religious community space. In the Jewish
Yes.
community, we find individuals who are pro-Palestinian and want to support us and critical of Israel. But again, the higher you go up in terms of the organized Jewish community, such as the American Jewish Committee, the Conference of Jewish Presidents, the Anti-Defamation League, they are very much far away from any kind of compromise, if you will, on this issue. Whereas those who are more critical of Israel, I mean, from our standpoint, have no power.
Right.
They're individuals. They come, they sit with us, and they mourn with us, and they weep with us, but they have no influence in the larger Jewish community. Or is that just a perception? That we need to correct ourselves. How do we navigate that religious community space with the Jewish community in particular?
Yes. Well, I do believe that there are Jewish persons of influence in various areas that do side with us. I think that, or side with our general positions as Muslim Americans. I was a guest recently of the organization Sharaka. Myself, several other members of the communities in association with Imam W.D. Muhammad, imams from several communities. We were the guests of the Israelis. And we met a little bit of every, I mean, if you know, that's a segment on its own, just what we encountered. But what we were able to pick up in general was the fact that even among the leadership, everyone doesn't see things the same way. In the religious space, however, I really am of the opinion that the Muslims themselves have to regroup. I think that the best contribution that we could make is that we have to become, I'll use the word again, we have to become sensitized again by our religion based upon its best sources. And I think that hasn't happened. And because of that, we get what Sam is mentioning. We're shouting at one another. We're coming to the table simply wanting to be heard, but we don't want to hear. And I think if we study the strategies, not just the Prophet Muhammad, praise and peace be upon him, in terms of just his direct teaching, but also his strategies as a leader, being able to build bridges, form ties, and actually accept losses. He accepted at least what were apparent losses for the greater good. We've lost, not all of us, but I think far too many of us in religious leadership have lost that ethic, that wisdom. So we're ill prepared in a lot of instances to really even engage our Christian or Jewish brothers and sisters to push dialogue forward.
Sam, you have a question?
I do actually, Imam. I had a question, and I have a lot of Jewish friends and Jewish business partners, etc. And so we debate a lot. And one of my really close friends is a top attorney in New York, and he's, we check each other. And he says I keep him on his toes and whatnot. But he claims, and I don't know if I necessarily disagree with him, but do you believe that Islam is due for a reformation? Is it due for an evolution into modern times, as it were? What do you feel about that question? How do you feel about that type of sort of thought process? Because really what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing is that there's 1.2 billion Muslims, and a third of them are extremists, or et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, well, my family's pretty large. My dad is one of 10. My mom is one of 7. I have 65 first cousins. None of them are extreme. And I can extrapolate that across the board. Listen, do they have bad thoughts like we all do? Of course, that's human nature. But what do you say to the idea that Islam may need a reformation or needs to be evolved in these modern times?
Well, the short answer is I disagree. To say that the religion needs to be evolved could suggest, it doesn't have to, but it could suggest that it is lacking something that's not currently there. And Allah, He informs us in the Quran, this day have I perfected for you your religion. Who needs to be evolved, perhaps, are those who claim the religion. And that's I would make that, and not to sound corny or cliche, but I think that that's a real thing. The average American, I would argue, is not in touch with the best of American values as they are expressed in the Declaration and the Constitution. So it's as an analogy, I would say perhaps I don't think the average Muslim is a bad person, but I would say that perhaps the average Muslim isn't as sensitized to the full measure of the value and beauty of the Quran and prophetic tradition, because we really have two movements in our history, more than two, but I'm separating it. We have the classical expression of al-Islam, beginning with our prophet and then those early generations. And then what we have is the formation of tradition. In tradition, this is in Judaism, this is in Christianity, the Catholic Church. They all have made this, they have all run into this problem. When you formulate, when you systematize, then in time you ossify and you become a fossil. You don't adapt, you don't adjust. We see those early generations of Muslims being able to engage with the changes of the world and make necessary adjustments. I think that activity has just tapered off. And that is what really needs to be revived. I think that is al-Islam. Al-Islam, as our prophet in those early generations had it, it was meeting the immediate needs of the people at that time. Because of that, they were able to make progress. For generations now, we haven't done that. So I think that the special help that Muslims need, reform is suggesting that something needs to be formed over. Something's wrong. So I would say that we are in not all of us, but too many of us are in a kind of slumber, a slumber of tradition. And we need to awaken out of that. And I think if we awakened out of that, it's like the people, Plato's cave. You come out of the cave and you see that it's a big, beautiful sun and a beautiful world out here. I think I think we're in that time. I think that's what's actually happening in many spaces in the Muslim world.
I want to go back though to, you had said something that I'm sure that our community would find very interesting to understand more. That Israelis invited leaders of the Imam Warti Muhammad community. What was their motive? What was the outcome? What are they trying to do? Because to many of us, we feel like they're trying to divide our community with these initiatives. So, can you give us a perspective on that, Imam Rashad?
Yes. Well, I'm sure perhaps many of the listeners know, and you all have heard of the Abraham Accords and the organization Sharaka. Their work is really based upon advancing what they see as these opportunities made available to the Israeli people by way of the Abraham Accords. To kind of put it in plain language, it seemed to us as they want to change their image and their position in the world because they want to ensure their well-being into the future. They need their inner region that is still hostile. And in order to change that, they need to form alliances and relationships with Arab and Muslim countries. We were brought there. This is my opinion. There may be even some members of our delegation who disagree with me, but I think we were brought there as with the hopes to return here to the United States and make connections with other groups such as MPAC, Iman, and other faith leaders to really encourage them to get on board with the overarching agenda that stems from the Abraham Accords. So it was almost like a no, I won't say almost. It was this is Israel. This is where we want to go. This is how we want to approach the future. Can you help promote this at home to the Muslim community in the United States of America? In a nutshell, I didn't think that was bad necessarily. I think everyone has an interest. We had an interest when we went over there. However, I think that's where the issue of nuance comes into play. Obviously, it's not that cut and dry for us to just become ambassadors on behalf of Israel. I mean, that's never going to happen. I mean, obviously, but that's what it was.
Now, but the Abraham Accords, one of the major criticisms is that Israel is trying to bypass the Palestinians by trying to make deals with the Emiratis and the Saudis and basically the Gulf countries and a few others.
Right.
And it's really about its treatment of the Palestinians. That's what's going to get, for lack of a better term, acceptance, is that if they offer the human rights to the Palestinians, in terms of what they deserve, but instead they bypass that and try to work with Gulf countries, work with your community,
Right.
the African American Muslim community, work with maybe some even Pakistanis or even a few others, and bypass the Palestinian issue. Did that come up at all in your conversations with them?
It did. It did. That's the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
It's impossible to have a conversation about Israel in its foreign relations without dealing with the Palestinian problem. It's just impossible. So it came up, and to be honest, again, this is my opinion. I'm aware of the fact that I'm a part of a delegation, but I'm utilizing this moment to express a personal opinion. My personal sensitivity was that the nature of the discussion flowed in one direction. There was a consistent emphasis of what the Palestinians need to do, how they should come to the table, what they need to do. In my capacity as an imam and just a community worker, we do a lot of counseling. It can be parent to child, husband and wife, co-workers even. No relationship can work that way and remain healthy. It always has to be, I did this wrong, and I know I hurt you, but you did this to me. It has to be a two-way street. It can't, like, I have a wife, I can't just tell my wife, this is what you did wrong. I may not be married for much longer. That can't be the dynamic of our marriage. So I sensed that that was sort of a constant refrain in the discussion. And I think that I actually had intention on suggesting that to them, because they asked us for our feedback. What do you all think? How did we do? What suggestions do you have? And that's why I'm comfortable sharing it here. That's one of them. That's just not the nature of human relationships. If you all are married, even when you think your wife is completely wrong, sometimes you have to say, yeah, you're right, baby, just to move the conversation down the road to get to a peaceful place. Sometimes you have to just concede. But when it's one-sided like that, you won't be successful ever.
All right, thank you. Sam, do you feel like you've been pushed out of the conversation because you're Palestinian?
I could say in some cases I have been, and in other cases I've been brought in fact, through our work through MPAC and the Hollywood Bureau. There's been multiple people and multiple entities here in Hollywood that reached out to me, and I consulted on a very big show, one of the largest running shows in history. Their season premiere is going to be on Israel and Palestine. So them coming to me and asking for my opinion, and I gave them multi-page response of how to address those different narratives is, I think people are actually trying to find that out. Some other people are shutting down, and that's also normal too. Some people are shutting down and don't want to engage and are just so angry and so lit up right now. And as long as this current part of the conflict is flaring up as it is right now in the most terrible way, you're not going to really find, it's going to be much more difficult to break through. So the preparation that we've been doing with my family members and everybody else that we're sort of looking to the future is to be in a position once things get to a place where the world is not is moving on to the next issue or the next thing, that we are there ready to have these difficult conversations, ready to move into a place where we haven't been before. And so the interfaith work, again, what I said earlier holds very true. You're not going to come to a solution without having both sides. And I believe that the other countries also have to atone to that, right? A lot of people bring up the fact that Jordan and Egypt had occupied as well after 1947, those two areas. Why wasn't a Palestinian state created at that point? There's many questions that people can talk about, but if you want to do the Abraham Accords, I'm full for it. But then have them as a part of an atonement section of the peace plan, which includes which includes France, which includes everyone that had a part to play in the current state of things. If you don't have them all a part of this, then it really just puts it on Israelis and Palestinians only. And unfortunately, where they're at right now, they need help to get past where they're at right now. And that requires the surrounding Arab countries, and that requires the other powers in the Western world that have created the facts on the ground.
Imam Rashad, has a Palestinian group ever approached you and invited you to have a conversation about Palestine? Because it seems that we're missing something in our community if the other side is inviting you and our side, our own community, is not inviting you to engage.
Well, to be fair, Rami, again, Dr. Rami Nashashibi, one of the other imams, Imam Mansour Sabri, who was he was the imam, he was the resident imam here for about 5 years prior to me moving here. And he still is an imam in our association. Maybe a couple of weeks later, he went at the invite of a group that Rami himself sponsored. And so we went into Palestine, but we were primarily in Israel. Whereas this group, they were primarily in Palestine. And they met a lot of the families who still are in possession of the keys to the homes that they were put out of. And they did that. So our community, the Imam Talib Sharif from Masjid Muhammad in DC, he was the head of our delegation, but he had already been to Palestine maybe a couple of months earlier. So he had already heard the other side, I should say. So we're getting it. We hear it from both ends.
All right. Well, just last question to both of you. And thank you so much for your time. This has been very illuminating and very important questions that come up from all of your comments. How do we organize and educate our communities to empower Muslims to work together more cohesively for Palestine? We'll start with Sam.
Well, I think that is part of the work, right? The organization aspect of all the different groups that are now, sort of marching forward, but not necessarily in unison with one another, right? In any movement, there has been sort of this central power. Even as I read, the autobiography of Martin Luther King, and there was and there's another question here: are there triggering statements, phrases, or words, or Palestinians should be more aware of? Which I'll get to that as a second part of this. But when you look at those movements, there were people all across the spectrum, and you see that all across the spectrum. So what we're doing is we're sort of creating profiles or identities within each of the groups. And the call I had this morning really did a really good job of saying, all right, well, there's the Israeli center, there's the Israeli right, there's the Israeli left. There's a Palestinian center, there's Palestinian left, and Palestinian right. You can do that and create personas for each of these groups. Muslims being their own group here in the United States, who also act differently than, say, Malaysia or Indonesia or Saudi Arabia or all that. So taking into consideration of how each of our Muslim communities think and sort of creating a through line that connects them all. Because what we need to do is agree upon a certain amount of principle and certain amount of words. And so leading to that second question, are there triggering statements, phrases, or words? When we continue using these words that shut down conversation, then we are getting nowhere. We are literally shouting into our echo chamber. We are entrenching ourselves into our position, and that is not the way forward. So, using words like genocide, there are, if you look at the different items that actually equate to genocide, there's 10 different ones. So you have to look at it. Does it tick a few boxes? Absolutely. Does it tick all the boxes? It does not. And so we need to be able to look at that empirically and ask ourselves when we use these words. In the book, Martin Luther King talks about the fact that there was a call to action called Black Power, right? And he was against using this word because it triggered white people here in the United States. It triggered them to a point that it shut down conversation. And he would argue for hours and hours and hours till the wee hours in the morning, saying, hey, I don't want to use these terms because it's not helping our cause. And the same thing goes with certain phrases that we're using with like Free Palestine or River to Sea, etc. I really loved what the King of Jordan did when he said all people will be free from the river to the sea, Israelis and Palestinians, because at the end of the day, they're intrinsically inclined now to be together, and we need to think of them in that way. So if we're using words that are no longer getting us where we need to go, then we need to rethink those words. And we need to look at where Muslims here are and around the world, and people of good conscience are around the world, and create that through line so that we are aligned in how we speak about this conflict and how we progress.
Imam
Rashad.
Yes.
The last word.
How do we educate our communities?
How do we? Yeah. How do we come? I think more is more educate and empower, but to work more cohesively.
Well, this may sound cliche, but I really just believe it boils down to living Islam. That means a lot. The Black community, we tend to have this problem. You know, I have several friends who own businesses, African Americans, and they have the record. Their sales go up whenever someone gets shot by the police. So they made a killing during the George Floyd protest era. And then afterward, everything goes back down. So in large part, the Black community is reactionary. I think that we, whether intentional or not, we tend to be, as Muslim Americans, we can be reactionary as it pertains to these issues. And the key is not to be. The key is to be conscious of our brothers and sisters in the world at all times, and with an awareness of their state, work to establish Muslim life here in America. So it's a difficult question to answer if the premise of the question is, what can we do about Palestine now that this is going on? Because more than likely we'll come up with a band-aid solution because we weren't working together prior to now. So I think that we have to really register the fact that we are actually brothers and sisters in Al-Islam, and we're brothers and sisters in humanity. And we have to ask ourselves as Muslim Americans, what is our agenda? What is the Muslim agenda? What is our purpose here as Muslims? And how are we establishing the Ummah of Muhammad in the right way here in America? Without giving due consideration to these, what I would consider to be fundamentals, I think that what we'll come up with, it'll be satisfactory in the short term, but not necessarily the long term. I hope that's not too vague. But
no, it's very important. No, it's very important.
Yes.
I appreciate your honesty, brutal honesty that we need at this time. So I thank you both for joining us and for your wisdom and guidance based on your experiences. Even though you come from two different sectors, we see the commonality both of your work. And I believe, as you both said, we really need to stress the issue of common humanity as we move forward. And I think that's how Islam can really be a contribution to America, by stressing the common humanity and guiding the policies of our decision makers in our country so that it avoids war in solving these very difficult problems that we're facing in the Middle East and also here on our own streets in America itself. I think there's that commonality of dealing with racism and bigotry and injustice and the inequities in life, that we need to stress the human security over national security, that we need to think about the rights of people and not geopolitics, not just geopolitics of the states, that we need to bolster as allies and bring down those people that we don't want to hear from. And when it comes to Israel, at the end of the day, it is in a Muslim world. And if it wants to be integrated into the Muslim world, then it has to start respecting, first and foremost, the rights of Palestine and the sanctity of Jerusalem. I mean, for every year, every Ramadan, Israeli troops going into the Al-Aqsa Mosque, that's not the way to promote reconciliation and integration. That's showing that you don't respect the people that really established Jerusalem as a sanctuary for Jews. It was the Muslims that brought the Jews back to Jerusalem after the downfall of the Roman Empire. And it was the Muslim world that the Jewish communities who were suffering from pogroms in Europe, they fled to Muslim lands to seek protection. So we find that that narrative is missing in the understanding of the region. And it's our job as religious leaders, faith leaders, and leaders in shaping public opinion, like Sam is working in, to at least let people know of this narrative and that needs to be part of the conversation. The Islamic narrative of Jerusalem as a place for religious freedom and a place for all religions, that Islam at least demanded from us, and we as Muslims, by and large, respected and adhered to those rules. And now, after the British took over and now the state of Israel has taken over, we see anything and everything but that. So we hope that we can continue this very important conversation and bring communities together towards that human security goal of freedom for human rights and freedom from fear, from the violence that millions of Palestinians are suffering from to this day. So thank you very much for your time. Imam Rashad Abdul-Rahmaan from Masjid al-Islam in Atlanta, Sam Blan from the great sectors of Hollywood and here in Los Angeles. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.